Professor Elm is the professor of Gen 2 and seems to represent a decidedly intentional move away from Professor Oak. Remember, in early generations, Oak is visually presented as a stout, somewhat imposing and severe character, stern and somewhat patriarchal actually. Elm, by contrast, and matching his namesake tree, is more skinny and limber and decidedly more cheerful in his aspect. He smiles in his artwork and has a short white coat and colorful striped shirt and green pants, and in Heart Gold and Soul Silver he's portrayed as carrying too many notes around and dropping them everywhere, and with his shirt conspicuously untucked from his pants. He's even got a little bit of stubble on his chin, like he didn't quite properly shave this morning. He's also much younger than Oak, and where Oak approached handing the player their first Pokemon and Pokedex as a ritual of some gravitas, Elm ropes the player into helping him with his research by the expedience of just asking for a casual favor and handing over a Pokemon, and that then eventually escalates through Pokemon theft and egg hatching mechanics into a full-blown trainer's journey. It's a very different way of handling that early stage of the journey, and it really does give Gen 2 a very different feeling. Ethan, the male player character in Gen 2, is an interesting iteration. Red, if you remember his sprite, is conspicuously anonymous in a non-detailed jacket and jeans with a cap hiding half of his face, a blank slate for the player to project themselves onto. Ethan, on the other hand, displays much more of a sense of individuality and fashion preferences. The backwards cap, Ash Ketchum style, says that he's determined and maybe a little bit of a brat, and his jacket, shorts, hat, and shoes all have a unified red and yellow color scheme, bright signal colors that ask for attention, contrasted against white and black patterning that creates texture and interest. Now, don't get me wrong, in his original sprite he's still a fairly generic child character, but he's much more specific than Red was, and seems like much more of his own person. The remakes sleek him down a lot, removing the bulk of his sensible jacket and giving him something much more like athleisure wear, and sadly also takes away a lot of the detailing and color from his design, which, frankly, I mourn a little bit. There's some personality, I think, that gets lost there. Original Ethan looked like a little bit of a brat, but in the remakes he looks like the same cheerful shonen protagonist as basically every other Pokemon protagonist. Ah well. Pokemon Crystal was the first game to include a choice of female protagonist, and Chris here was the very first, only to somewhat unceremoniously be replaced by Lyra in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, possibly because she's very much a design of her era. If Ethan is more specific and personable than Red, then Chris is a step up from even that, with an extremely specific sense of fashion and a very unique hairstyle with those gravity-defying green pigtails. She wears much more athletic gear than Ethan, with close-fitting shorts, fancy sneakers, and a tight top under a crop-top jacket, and her Pokegear on a jaunty string around her neck, which adds a sense of casual looseness to her vibe that Ethan certainly doesn't have in his original design. She is very much a turn of the millennium design, holding on to a 90s almost toy-like colorful fashion aesthetic, which definitely makes her unique, especially among Pokemon protagonists, but also dates her, and certainly by the 2010s, it's an aesthetic that would have made her feel out of step with the designs of the remake. Parts of her design would survive in Lyra, the next protagonist, but still, it's a bit harsh to just replace her like that. She is a fun bit of design, and I think it would have been fun if they just tried to update her instead. Lyra is the female protagonist of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, replacing poor Chris from Pokemon Crystal, who got retconned out of the remakes. Elements of Chris persist though, those gravity-defying ponytails, for example, as well as the red top and the practice of keeping her Pokegear on a string. Besides that though, Lyra to me feels interestingly much more like a closed-off design than Ethan, especially in his updated remake design with his backwards cap to let light onto his face and the backpack behind his back. By contrast, Lyra wears this huge hat that literally casts a shadow over her eyes and conceals most of her head and hairstyle. Combined with the straps of the overall and the bag, it feels like Lyra puts more things between herself and the world than Ethan does. This is not to suggest that Lyra feels standoffish or evil or anything, just that she has a little bit more of a vibe that she might keep a secret or two or have something up her sleeve, which is aided by her relatively dark color scheme. Blood red and deep navy blue and black and white. It really wouldn't take much tweaking to make her design look straight up villainous. That's not a criticism though. I think that makes her interesting and kind of unique among Pokemon protagonists. Silver is a pretty great little rival design. Where Blue was mostly a overconfident jackass, Silver is a much more complicated character with a correspondingly much darker character design, black and purple with red accents. He really does have a little bit of that Team Rocket aesthetic on him, though not enough to tip the secret that he's secretly Giovanni's son. You do get a generally more menacing vibe from this kid than Blue ever gave off. He doesn't look like he's going off on a Pokemon adventure, he looks like a kid with a scheme going on, someone who's planning something. Conversely, I don't actually like his design as much in the remakes. The baggy fashion and thick long hair in the original helped this vibe of someone hiding something, where the tighter clothes in the remake are less visually concealing, and his jacket here gives him more of a vibe of a kid who ran away from a private school, which, fair, maybe that is what he is, but it feels less dark and a little bit more spoiled, I think. I do like, though, that his sleek hair ends in a spiky mess down around the neck. That's a good way to visually indicate that his calm exterior hides an inner turmoil, and the red hair color obviously also helps with that. He's still a good rival design, I'm just a little blinded by nostalgia. Every Pokemon protagonist has a mom, and while she's rarely a major character in the story, a lot of players learn to have complicated feelings towards the mother in Gen 2 because she keeps calling you and telling you that she spent your goddamn money. She spends it on helpful things, of course, and things that can't be obtained any other way, but still, you were supposed to help me save that money, damn it! It does make Gen 2's mom a substantially more active part of her child's life than, frankly, most of the moms in the franchise, and I've always really liked her character design. With her sandals, hair up in loops, and with a headband, and that cheerful apron with colorful squares on it, she gives a powerful vibe of a fun mom, a creative mom who's taking painting classes on the weekend and who decorates the whole house for Christmas and birthdays. There's something in her design that feels cheerful and supportive and maybe quietly just a little bit happy that you're out of the house on your Pokemon journey so she can get started writing that book of poetry that she always wanted to do. I don't know, she has a simple design, but I've always felt like there's a lot of personality in it. She doesn't just feel like a stay-at-home mom who waits for you with cookies, she feels like she's got some creative projects going on, you know? Yucine is a character introduced in Pokemon Crystal to interact with that game's expansion of the Legendary Beasts storyline, where he is an obsessive Pokemon researcher who has chased Suicune around for a decade, and who provides a little bit of extra context about the beasts to the player. His official trainer class is Mystery Man, which I guess is why he's dressed as a stage magician. His sprite and artwork from Crystal suggests that maybe he's juggling or something, making the Pokeball float, but yeah. Honestly, his design has never really made much sense to me. He's got that very sharp haircut and fitted suit, which could make him look sleek, but then also a huge butterfly and a rather silly-looking cape. His design really doesn't seem to relate much to him as a character. He certainly doesn't look like a researcher, and he doesn't look like a neurotic, weird obsessive. Heart Gold and Soul Silver did add some diamond-shaped pattern marks to his jacket, at least, which ties him visually a little bit to Suicune, at least, but yeah, this just isn't really much of a character design, in my opinion. Faulkner is the first gym leader of Gen 2 and somehow manages to evolve a Pidgeotto at level 9, which, I mean, okay, goddamn, I guess he really is good at birds. As a design, he is, well, I'm not 100% sure, actually. As far as I can make out, he's dressed in traditional Japanese falconry clothing, because it was historically a popular pastime among the samurai class, and so I would surmise that he's supposed to evoke a sense of martial tradition and severity, which, in fairness, he does do that. The bracers on his arms help with this a lot, I think. They're purchased for the birds, probably, but they do also carry something of that martial connotation. The dramatic sharp haircut he's got with one eye covered by bangs also adds some intensity to him. It sharpens his expression, and that does support the energy here. He's a solid enough design, even if he's not a particularly memorable one. The Bug Catcher is a classic Pokemon trainer type, and as many people know, the Pokemon itself was inspired by the Japanese children's hobby of bug collecting and battling. So, no wonder then that Generation 2 decided to build a gym leader around that theme. Bugsy, who, first of all, that cannot be his real name, that has to be a nickname, right? But Bugsy, as a design, is essentially an evolution of the Bug Catcher, combining that trainer class's trademark shorts and bug net with a Boy Scout aesthetic, visually signifying a more rigorous and disciplined approach to his outdoor activities than the more casual bug catchers, which is really clever design, honestly. He doesn't look particularly scary or intimidating, being only the second gym leader of the generation. He doesn't need to, but you do get the sense that he's not quite like the bug-type pushovers that you're used to, either. Whitney. Do not be fooled by her innocent appearance. There hides a horror on her Pokemon team, a beast of unforgivable power. Actually, just please tell me that I wasn't the only one who got my shit rocked by Whitney back in the Gen 2 days. I didn't know how rollout worked. The Miltank kept one-shotting me. Anyway, as a design, though, Whitney has an interesting challenge. What does normal type look like, and how do you make normal type not boring? Whitney tries to solve this by keeping things simple but sporty, so she wears a white skirt with basic red accents over short shorts and sneakers with long socks. It emphasizes an athletic vibe. Her colors are simple, her hairstyle is simple, the design isn't really pushing any kind of gimmick or strong aesthetic, but it's not quite as basic as most other normal trainer classes. It's an interesting direction to take, but while it is appealing design, it does end up a little bit boring in the end. Heart Gold and Soul Silver seems to recognize this and tries to fix it by adding more color and detail to her design with yellow buttons, striped socks, a wristband, and a hair accessory. And that does add a lot more interest to her design, but maybe it comes a little bit at the cost of looking normal. Yeah, for my money, Pokemon wouldn't quite figure out how to design the perfect gym leader for normal types until they made Larry. Morty is the first ghost-type gym leader in the franchise, although you really wouldn't know it to look at his original Gen 2 design. There is something interesting about that, mind you. Ghost types are dark and scary and often take visual cues from evil and horror, but Morty looks almost aggressively normal in his long-sleeved shirt and track pants and with that odd mullet arrangement around his headband. He looks like someone's shitty weed dealer or a dude who flunked out of college to really focus on his DJ career. It's an interesting dichotomy to play with between the trainer and the type, but I'm not sure it works within Pokemon's often much more literal design paradigm. Game Freak seems to agree with me on that one, because in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Mort gets a serious update, adding a purple scarf with ghostly soul pendant, ragged edges, and blood-stained designs on them, as well as shifting his color scheme towards a much more stark black and white. It's a lot more dramatic and definitely suits the ghost type better, although the messy hair over the headband and the sleepy eyes will always make him look a little bit dopey to me. Chuck is the fighting gym leader of Gen 2, and I mean, yeah, he does look like a dude named Chuck, I'll give him that. Which is not me mocking the design at all, by the way, because Chuck here does look like a very recognizable kind of archetype of the martial arts guy. Bruno from Gen 1 was a very similar design to Chuck in costuming. Same naked body, same ragged pants with belt, but where Bruno was a super jacked wild man, looking like he's just come down off the mountain where he trains by punching boulders, Chuck is a lot more soft and round, with some visible belly fat, and combined with the receding hairline and facial hair, it makes him look basically like someone's dad. He looks like someone who practices martial arts, and seriously, someone who is strong, but who is not ascetic, someone who's not obsessed with body control and self-denial. It makes him a bit more likable, I think, and fun, which is something that his design in Heart Gold and Soul Silver very much leans into, with those big, broad smiles on his face. I like him. It's a representation of martial arts that feels a lot more cheerful than the usual hard-edged punch boys. Jasmine has an interesting design challenge to solve. How do you represent the newly added Steel type in character design? Much in the way that Morty from the same generation seems designed to contrast with his Ghost type, Jasmine seems designed to contrast with the Steel type. Rather than the flinty, stark, hard-edged design that you might expect, she's a young girl in a sundress, elegant and slightly upper-class looking. The Steel type's features comes through a little bit in her hair with those sharp spear point tufts, and it seems to be represented otherwise mostly just through the starkness and the sheerness of Jasmine's pure white color scheme. It evokes the shininess of steel, I suppose, the starkness and simplicity of the material. And for my money, that really does work. It's not intuitively obvious, but upon consideration, you totally understand it. Which is why I don't like her Heart Gold and Soul Silver design very much. There seems to have been a thought that her first design was too boring, and so Game Freak added what I think is a lot of unnecessary detail. A red bow, red hair accessories, two-tone dress, it loses the simplicity that used to evoke the qualities of Steel, and it has softened her even more. It feels like a downgrade, honestly. Price is the first Ice-type gym leader in the franchise, and much like Morty and Jasmine before him, he seems to have been designed initially to contrast his type specialization rather than conform to it. To wit, he is an old man in a t-shirt, shorts, and sandals, dressed for summer rather than winter. His sprite from Gen 2 also has a genuinely kind of menacing aspect to it, with those dark circled eyes and the way he resentfully scowls over his shoulder. The idea here seems to be that the Ice-type is represented by a coldness of his character rather than his design, which is actually kind of a fun way to do that. Pokemon, however, is usually a more literal series when it comes to character design, and so in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, he's been redesigned to wear a coat and a white scarf over a vest and turtleneck sweater. Here, he is fully dressed for the winter cold. His battle sprite is even introduced with a blast of chilly air whipping past him. The new design is certainly more intuitively readable and more Pokemon-like in its obviousness, more child-friendly in that way, but I think the original was honestly more interesting. Claire is the first Dragon-type gym leader in Pokemon, and also the cousin of Lance from the Elite Four, although you kinda almost didn't need me to tell you that because you can really tell from her design. Lance has short red hair that points upwards, she has long blue hair that points downwards, he wears a full suit, she wears a spandex. It's very red Oni, blue Oni design, contrasting opposites, unified by the both of them wearing the exact same kind of big dramatic cape. It definitely works visually, the connection is clear, and it means that Claire shares a little bit of the Dragon-type visual language of Gen 1, which is fine, but also, like, this is literally just Lance again, but girl this time, and especially compared to the ways that Morty, Jasmine, and Price experiment and try new things in the design space, this just ends up feeling a bit tired. Janine is the daughter of Koga and steps up to replace him in the Indigo League when her dad gets promoted to the Elite Four in Gen 2. And as a replacement for Koga, well, she's very much her father's daughter. She wears the same uniform, she strikes the same pose in her artwork as he does in his Pokemon Yellow artwork, and in the prototype Space World demo for the Gen 2 games, she even exactly copies his pose in her sprite. Even in the remakes, she enters the battle scene very much the same way that her father does, dashing in from the side to land in a ninja pose. The differences between them are largely minute in the details. Janine wears white tabi socks rather than black, a different belt around her waist, slightly different bracers, and her gi costume doesn't open around the front like her father's does. But the point here is that she's a daddy's girl growing up to be just like him, and that's also the charm of her. Koga is a stern, crotchety old man, all martial seriousness, even despite the common rider scarf in his costume, but Janine is a bright-eyed young child who just can't quite carry the menace that an old man can, and thus she ends up looking precocious and kinda cute instead, maybe even evoking a little bit of Gap Moe in the contrast between her childish cuteness and the relative brutality of using poison as a primary tool of battle. I don't mind Janine as a design, although I'm in general not really a huge fan of distaff counterparts as a design trope. I know the point is that she is copying her father, but I do wish her design allowed her a little bit more of her own unique expressiveness. A little less Boruto, a little more JoJo, if you get my meaning. Will is one of the new additions to the Elite Four in Gen 2, and he's a curious one. There's some oddness with his gender in the code of the game, which identifies him as female, and for some reason, all of his Pokemon switch gender in the remakes, almost as though the gender is somehow relevant to the character. Now, does any of this mean anything? Well, probably not. It's probably just some kind of coding bug, but maybe. See, Will is a masked character in the style of tokusatsu and children cartoons, and all masked character designs are, to some extent, playing with themes of secret identities, and I can't help but wonder if Will, at some stage, Lucina style, was meant to be secretly a woman in disguise, or something like that. That would be a classic trope of the kind that Pokemon employs all the time, and it would work with the psychic type, literally a case of playing mind games. But unfortunately, Will has never really been expanded upon since Gen 2, at least not enough for any of this to matter. He doesn't even show up in the anime. So, his design in the original Gen 2 artwork skews towards a masked gentleman thief with boxy slacks, a short tie, and a black, red, and white primary color scheme. He's dressed almost like a concierge at a fancy hotel with cufflinks and white gloves, and identified fashion-wise with service staff mostly, the kinds of people that the rich habitually ignore. It's very formal, but also sparse, completely covering him from the neck down. Again, it's the kind of outfit you would put on a character concerned with concealing their identity in some kind of children's cartoon. The idea seems to be to connect the Phantom Thief idea with his psychic type, because psychic types are also mysterious and unknowable, and it works well enough. Certainly, he's an appropriate level of eccentric to work as an Elite Four member. The remakes, though, take a little bit of a twist on this. The contemporary anonymizing Phantom Thief suit and tie is replaced with a much more eccentric gentleman thief outfit of the old-school variety. A tailed waistcoat and a cravat over tailored pants, and a much smaller domino mask over the eyes. This is much more in the vein of your Scarlet Pimpernels and Zoros, mysterious masked noblemen archetypes, flamboyant, showy, and dandy-ish. Anonymous only insofar as you can't see his eyes, because he is very recognizable in that costume. His white gloves are even gone, which honestly I'm kind of not a fan of. Like, not wearing gloves means you leave fingerprints, and exposing any part of your identity sort of exists in friction with the man of mystery thing. I do like the increase in his theatricality, though. That's very appropriate for an Elite Four member, but yeah, I don't know. I think I prefer the more modern but also anonymous look of his first design. That's just me, though. Karen is one of the two new members of the Kanto Elite Four in Gen 2, and a dedicated Dark-type trainer, and her design communicates that really clearly in Gen 2, with a black dress with red accents playing against her platinum silver hair to make some really sharp contrast. She seems to be playing to a mean girl archetype, i.e. she's a gorgeous, glamorous woman whose beauty belies a streak of darkness and cruelty, that sort of thing. And that fits with the Dark-type pretty well, because the Dark-type moveset is often themed around bullying and playing dirty and various forms of cruelty. It's not a revolutionary design, but it's very clear design, and it's appropriate for a Pokemon game. The remakes take an interestingly different tone with her design, though, swapping the black and red dress for cream capri pants and a yellow spaghetti strap crop top. Her color scheme now only has a very thin black accent over her bust, and her silver platinum hair has turned blue. As a color scheme, this is almost the opposite of sinister. Now, partly this is probably a response to a change in what mean girl archetypes looked like in the 10 years between the originals and the remakes, but it also seems like quite a deliberate use of contrast in the design language. Here is a bully who curates their look to be sunny and bright so that they can hide the darkness within. Not that Karen is actually that much of a bully in her sparse appearances, she's just a bit dismissive and rude in the dialogue before the fight, but the aesthetic gestures work as design. I think it's a really fun idea. The Rocket executives from Pokemon Gold and Silver are a fantastic demonstration of how the series' design aesthetic has changed since its beginning. In Gen 2, they are unnamed and are treated essentially as another kind of rocket grunt, anonymous mooks of no real importance just leveled up with stronger Pokemon teams for you to beat. The male executives, thus, are pretty blatantly just aping Giovanni, wearing suits over black shirts with a rocket logo and doing Giovanni's one hand in his pocket pose, while the single female executive dresses in something halfway between a power suit and evening wear with huge pearl earrings and coiffed hair. And this matches what Team Rocket was in early generations, genuine organized crime, and kind of scary as villains for a child protagonist. Thievery, brutality, exploitation, and thuggery dressing up in the surface aesthetics of respectable business. By the remakes, though, Pokemon's vibes and aesthetics have changed rather substantially, and so, in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the executives have names and faces and unique designs all their own. Proton is the first one you face, and design-wise, he's basically an upgraded grunt. He's got white boots and gloves and a utility belt, I guess, and a popped collar setting him apart from the trash mobs that he leads. Next, you fight Petrel, whose hunched posture and bow-legged walk is classic cartoon delinquent archetype design, and he, once again, has the gloves, boots, and utility belt to mark him out as special. Where Proton is more on the cocky, handsome bastard side of the bad guy, Petrel is much more the weaselly bully in terms of his aesthetics. The next level up from that is Ariana and Archer, both of whom wear fully white suits over black shirts, inverting the usual Rocket color scheme and recalling somewhat Jesse and James's color scheme from the anime, actually, like with the reddish hair and the bluish hair. The Rocket executives thus fully abandon any pretense of being actual scary mobsters or dressing like legitimate business people in favor of something much more cartoony and much less intimidating. These are villains from a kids' show, more family-friendly, with much less real-world inspiration to add any dark undertones. And yeah, the villainous teams of the games have only generally gotten sillier and less dark over time. Team Rocket almost dressed like Nazis back in the day, while Team Skull, Yell, and Star are just rowdy kids looking for a social group. And while Proton, Petrel, Ariana, and Archer are definitely more varied and interesting as designs than their anonymous origins, I can't help but miss a little bit the older generations of Pokemon's willingness to engage with more base and grounded forms of villainy, like animal abuse, gambling, and extortion, rather than the supervillain cartoon tropes that the series has come to rely upon. I think something was lost when the series went entirely family-friendly. But then again, I'm just an old man yelling at clouds.